Greetings all. Okay, it's back to Switchology. But you've forgotten about that. But we will continue, and now we're going to have a look at how the other half lives with the T72. And a T72 is not a T72 is not a T72. The thing's been around for almost 5 decades. You can imagine there have been a couple of upgrades here and there. But the one we're going to have a look at here is one of these slightly earlier ones. So we're talking about a 1979-1980 standard. Differences are going to be minor for the next couple of years, mainly in terms of armor values as opposed to the fire control system. Now, it happens that there will be an inside the hatch coming out on a T72M in a couple of months, most likely. It'll come out in the World of Tanks North America channel, so have a gape out for that. But of course, an inside the chieftain's hatch will only get you so far to showing how it actually works in practice, because we're not actually going around shooting things very much. Although, in fairness, if Battlefield Vegas get a T72, you never know what might happen. I doubt they'll repair the laser rangefinder though. So what we're going to do is going to hop into this Steel Beasts Pro PE T72M1, and I prefer Steel Beasts Pro PE simply because it's a damn good simulator. I'm recording this, Gunner Heat PC just released, and if you want to have a crack at a T72 yourself, it is modeled and is pretty dang similar in Gunner Heat PC, but again, I'm a Steel Beast guy. So whilst I wish Gunner Heat PC good luck, and I highly recommend you check it out, I mean, I bought it, Steel Beast it is for here. So without further ado, into the sim we go. Okay, so here we are in our T72M1. I'm not going to talk about the exterior at all because, well, as I say, there is an inside the hatch coming on the vehicle, which will actually be T72M, but makes very little difference. The only point worth observing is that compared to much earlier T72s, i.e. the first generation, there are no sight housings or optic housings on the side for the coincidence rangefinder that was in the original model T72. Now we have moved on to a laser rangefinder. Hooray! Or hurrah, whatever the Russians say. Thanks. So let's start off with the TC's position with the traditional Soviet-style forward opening hatch and the NSVT 12.7mm machine gun, which is frankly a beast of a weapon. You will note that it mounts on its own ring separate to the cupola itself, and that means that this can rotate around independently, but it also means though that because this cupola is always to the front, shall we say, the hatch housing, you can never swing the machine gun all the way around to point the same direction as the main sight down here. But what you can do is you can have it most of the way around and then pivot on the pin till to go straight, but it's not really the same. What that also means then is that on the front of the vehicle, where the night vision is directly in front of the primary optic, you cannot aim the 12.7 at night with the night vision spotlights. Similarly, or at least not easily. Maybe if you're wearing very good NVGs and you're leaning over, it's not convenient. Similarly, like the other 12.7, you can't fire it from within the vehicle. 12.7 comes with a 60 round box of ammunition. It's either all API or it's an API HEI mix. 2 sights. One is you have your traditional blade sight with elevation markings that you can use. Excuse me, wrong button. There we go. And I mean, it works like any other blade sight that you may have ever encountered in the past. Alright, that's some very unhappy personnel. The alternative, and you can see what's happened here, is that it's pivoted around. The alternative is this reflector sight, which is designed primarily for anti-aircraft work. But otherwise, it's pretty similar as a concept. Just point and shoot, no ballistic computers or anything else like that. If you're aiming off, you're aiming off with the aid of the graduations. And the nice thing about the reflector sight is that you can see below. You're not obscured by the sight there at all. So that is most of it for the 12.7. The last thing I'll note are these handles. And these are basically brake handles. So because the machine gun is really such a beast, it's pretty hard to control and keep on target. Anybody who's tried playing with a caliber 50 flex mount, you understand it's, yeah, you're going to get in the right general area, but it's not massively accurate. So by pressing down the brake handle, or letting go in this case, the machine gun is going to maintain more or less on target. Nice little feature. So that is basically it for the outside. Now let's hop down in, close the hatch, and you can see two all but useless little side scopes, and two, well, a little bit more useful ones to the sides. But what he's mainly going to be looking at is this, the TKN3, and you know it's a TKN3 because it says TKN3. This is your combination day and night commander's vision optic. So obviously in default it is day mode. There is a heater here. If it's a little bit cold and condensation starts getting on your sight, turn on your heater. When you look inside, the reticle is very simple. It is for ranging and target acquisition only. So you have a stadiometric rangefinder there. So let's say this Centurion is, it's a little bit tricky because the elevation on it seems a bit limited. All right, let's try this one. Yeah, it seems to be just about 1,200 meters, give or take. And, well, okay, that's well and good, but that's a backup again because the gunner does have a laser rangefinder. More importantly, though, is this is a true hunter-killer system by our usual definitions. So the way this works is there are two buttons on these handles, right at the very tips. And in my T55 video, I did a disservice. I hypothesized it was a radio button. It wasn't. It was a slew to queue, or a target designate, if you wish to use it that way. However, on the T55 slew to queue, you're physically fighting. As the turret is spinning one way, you're manhandling the cupola the other way to keep the cupola on target. On the T72, this right-hand button is a counter-rotation button. So as I look through the sight, whoops, let me turn off the mouse here. On the bottom right corner, you're going to see where the gun is pointing, and then a little white dot is where I am looking. So I shall look over the right-hand side, and you can see that the gun is pointing forward. Now, if I tell the gunner to traverse right, what will happen is I will start fighting the cupola to try to keep on a target. So let's say these trucks.
Traverse right, tank.
Yeah, okay, there it is. Okay, on the truck. Fantastic. Well, that's a little bit annoying. So what you can do is hold down the right mouse button, not right mouse button, the right control handle. And now if I tell the TC to the gunner to slew,
Traverse left, truck.
Complete stabilization as regards to the traverse. Now elevation is still down to the manual control, just how well you can push up and down. But now I have a completely stabilized in traverse system, and I have a slew to queue. So I can bring the gunner directly onto target by holding down the right button and holding down the left button. Basically, gunner Sabo PC designate.
Identified.
And the gun comes on. Take that to the next logical conclusion, and that means that I can engage multiple targets. As the gunner is engaging the first target, I can be immediately searching for the second. So in effect, and hopefully the AI gunner gets this right, what we're looking at here is something like gunner, Sabo, 2 tanks, left tank first, designate.
Identified.
Gun swings over, he's on.
Fire.
I give him the engage command.
On the
I'm
way.
already looking to the next target. Target, right tank, designate. And you can see it swung the gun barrel over.
Identified. Fire.
And now I
On
go
the
to a
way.
PC. Target, ceasefire, gunner, Sabo PC. Fire heat.
Fire heat. Identified. Fire heat.
Let's try that again.
On the way.
And you're moving on to the next target. And so what?
Identified.
So that's basically the hunter-killer system in operation. Works very well. Obviously, again, you are limited to what you can see through a daylight fixed by 5 optic. But remember, this tank was basically the T72A export model. T72M and M1 are basically T72As with varying armor packages with a 4 export sticker slapped on the front. So 1979, these things were built up through the mid to late 1980s. A lot of other tanks of the era didn't have that target designate function. I mean, the idea goes back at least to Conqueror, but if you think about it, how many tanks don't have it? So, other controls that the TC has available to him. Let's go down here. The PKMT machine gun, so it has 250 rounds in the bin. Obviously, the commander is the person whose job it is to care and feed for the machine gun. He can physically push the solenoid himself if the electrical firing system isn't working, charge the gun. There is a chute on the left-hand side that collects the brass and link. There's a catchment bin down at the bottom, catches about 500 rounds worth. So you get about 2 bins of, or 2 boxes of coax before you have to empty out the bin. You just chuck that at the top. If you have to, you can shoot more rounds. There'll be another 200, 250 rounds will fit in the ejection chute before the thing just jams up. And that's actually pretty similar to, let's say, the spent casing bin on the M1. Big radio at the front here. Master control box for all the various tank systems. Engine shutdown and fire extinguisher. I believe these are the 2 master switches there. They're behind the emergency, safety flaps, and on the one that I had a look at, there was actually a lead seal that you had to break before you had to push one of those things. Commo control, so this is your off intercom, radio 1, radio 2 if you have a radio 2. Autoloader control box. Why would the TC need the autoloader control box? Well, because he actually has some functions in the loading mechanism. You think it's a complete autoloader? Not quite. High explosive rounds are an exception. So if you undo this button, this little thing will come down here. There's a set of controls for different components of the autoloader. Now, one of the things you can do is tell the RAM function to disable. So if he gives the gunner a command to load frag, and he disables the RAM, what will happen is that the carousel will spin around. I'll talk about it in a bit. Round and propellant will come up, and it will just sit there because he's disabled the RAM. And this is where the commander can set the fuse for the HE shell. Now, there's apparently a bit of a liberty in the model here because supposedly these turret stowage are for Sabo only, but it does allow us to see the HE cap. The HE round has basically 3 settings. I guess maybe 4, but 3 in effect. Super quick, delay, and super sensitive. Now, super quick and delay are like you would expect on any other tank HE round. Sort of either explode on impact or delay is 0.063 of a second, something like that. Super sensitive, though, is you take off this little protective cap, and then the fuse is basically exposed to everything. And it is so sensitive it'll detonate on twigs and leaves and even heavy rain. So if you fire this thing in a heavy rainstorm, it could detonate halfway downrange to the target. Why you would want to do that? Well, let's say you're shooting at troops in cover in a tree line. Aim a little high, set it to super sensitive by removing the protective cap, and as soon as it hits any twigs or leaves or whatever, boom, you get an airburst effect that goes directly down on target. So the TC will set the fuse as necessary. It defaults to super quick. He'll go back, he'll turn the RAM function back on, and in it goes. If the autoloader does break down, there's a chain hoist to bring the round up, and there's another crank around somewhere for getting the carousel to turn. Okay, carousel. 22 rounds in the autoloader, and it gets a very bad rep because of the tendency of the tank to eject the turret. Now, frankly, I think this reputation is a little bit undeserved, because whether the turret remains attached to the tank or not, I don't think the crew really care. Because if the ammunition detonates in an M60 with all the stowage here, or in a Leopard 2 with the stowage, well, I guess it's on that side, there's still going to be a massive blast going into the turret, whether the turret is launched by the rounds being directly underneath or not. I suspect that the crew survivability factor in either case is pretty damn slim. So it really doesn't matter. Further, I don't think the 22 rounds in the carousel are the problem anyway, because A, it's way down low. I mean, you gotta hit really low to hit it, and if it's fragmentation flying around, you gotta get through the metal. It's not thick metal, but there is some metal between the turret floor and the propellant. You can even see there's a little metal flap here that protects. It's spring loaded, so as the round comes up, it pushes the metal out of the way to give a little bit of isolation. And then the projectiles are on top of the propellant charges, so there's a little bit more protection there as well. The problem is the additional 22 rounds. So T72 comes with 44 rounds, well, at least this version comes with 44 rounds as your default battle load. 22 of them are in the carousel. That means that there are 22 more stored elsewhere. Now, to an extent, they've taken what measures they can to protect it. So this red bin here, you can see with propellant charges stowed in them. That's actually a fuel tank. It's a 75-litre fuel tank, but it works as wet stowage. It provides a little bit more resistance to pieces of metal flying around before they hit the propellant, and it may even have an effect of putting out any smoldering fires. So how can fuel do that? Well, if there's no oxygen available, it's not going to catch fire. This is full fuel. And that's not the only stowage bin. There's also another stowage bin further forward here. You can just see it. That's like a 218-litre fuel tank here. That does the same thing for another, I think it's a dozen or 14 rounds. The real problem is things like this. So this is a combustible casing, like the, let's say the M1. This stuff can catch fire. And it's why you're not allowed to lap load, let's say, in the M1. If some hot metals fly around and they hit this thing, you are going to have a very bad day. Well, you're not going to have a bad day because you're not going to be around to see it anymore. And there are 5 propellant charges, if I recall correctly, scattered around inside the turret, plus an additional 6 projectiles. The solution to avoid your turret popping every time you get blown up, every time you get hit, is to simply not load these extra rounds. So instead of a battle load of 44 rounds, tank crews might go in with only 39 rounds or 38 rounds by simply not bothering to put these very exposed rounds into the turret. And if they're really paranoid, they can even not put in the stuff that are in the wet stowage and just only have the 22 rounds at the bottom. But that's probably overdoing it. So that is that is where I think your real problem comes. It's nothing to do with the autoloader. It's nothing to do with the carousel is. It's simply a matter of you have very sensitive, unprotected additional stowage inside the tank. And that would be a problem regardless if you have an autoloader or a manual loader. Unprotected, sensitive stowage is an issue. You would find here a couple of engraved metal panels. So they haven't modeled it here, but these are going to be charts that we'll use on the gunner's side to adjust the ballistic computer a little bit. The seat will elevate on this little rod here. This is for the night. One is a marker lights, the small low visibility light, and the other is an identification light. The identification light
Gunner, heat, tank, ceasefire.
is
Identified. Fire safe.
oh, excuse me.
On the way.
I didn't say fire system. Doesn't matter. The identification light,
Re-engage.
you can put a couple of numbers in here.
Target.
All right, that's enough.
Tank.
And you can identify the tanks at night. Okay, I think we've about covered the TC's position for daylight. Obviously he's got the big reach handle here. Don't see anything else immediately lying around. Fire extinguisher bottle. Okay, let's hop over to the, oh, I missed one. Yeah. Air conditioning system. And the gunner has one as well, and it appears to be controlled by this toggle switch. Okay, gunner's position. To the left of the 2A46 gun. It's not a 2A46M. This is an earlier version. It is a fair bit less accurate. The stub base catcher. So basically it's like your aft cap on an American round. After the round is fired and it gets ejected, it gets caught by this thing. This hatch opens up, and as you saw, it gets, I believe the current terminology is yeeted out the back, and thus reduces some of your fumes and makes a little bit of space inside. On the left, travel lock for the traverse, controller for the intercom again, and then the smoke grenade launcher control. Now I have, oh, there's your air conditioning system. I have two issues with this smoke grenade launcher. The first is it's in the wrong place. Almost every other tank that I can recall, the TC can access the smoke grenade launcher. He's the guy who pushes the button. On the M1, it's just on the right-hand side on the TC's panel. Alternatively, it may be positioned so that both the gunner and the commander can reach it, such as was seen on the Challenger 1 video. Here, though, they've decided for whatever reason to give the smoke launchers to the gunner, which means that the TC, who is probably the one most likely to see an incoming missile, is going to have to tell the gunner to pop smoke. The gunner has to stop whatever he's doing and then push the button. That takes seconds, whereas the TC just immediately reaching down and pushing the button is probably faster. So I don't know why they did that, but that's what they did. The other problem is it is stupidly complicated. You can have a selection of which banks you want to fire, which directions you want to fire. On the M1 it's salvo 1, salvo 2, and there's no practical difference. You just get two blasts. This, you get a lot of choices. Now, frankly, I can't imagine, if you need to pop smoke, taking the time to set something applicably. All I would do is just say, pop everything, or at least pop half. So when you just say gunner smoke, at least all the gunner has to do is just push this big button. Yay.
Identified.
Now, the way that particular smoke launcher was set, you'll note it only popped 4 rounds. There's all these other ones that have yet to be popped. So make of that what you will. I think it's a bad idea. perhaps the Russians know something that I don't, or the Soviets, or whoever. All right, controls, manual control for traverse, manual control for elevation. There's a turret clock. This is your round counter. So, okay, to show you the round counter, I need to talk about the autoloader again. Autoloader control is here. It has a number of positions. This is the load position. So this is the position you would have it in if you were loading rounds into the carousel. And your indicator here shows you how many empty positions you have in the carousel. Right now, 0. Off. Frag. I have at least 11 rounds of frag in the carousel. I could have more, but it's not going to tell me how many more because it stops at 11. If you want to know how many more you have, well, you got to take 22 and start subtracting from the other types of ammunition, such as Sabo, 7 rounds, and Heat, 4 rounds. I mean, it's old school, but I guess it works. The gunner's control handles on the TPD-K1, and that is actually the entire module here. The laser module is here, the night module here. They're technically all separate modules, even though the laser module is kind of integrated into the ballistic computer. Control handles are your standard left, right, up, down, elevate. 4 buttons. Trigger on the right is main gun, trigger on the left is coax. Thumb button on the right is your laser rangefinder, thumb button on the left is range reset to 0. And you actually do need that. And we'll talk about why in a few moments. The gunner also has a control box for all the various functions of the tank, and I think it's only the fire extinguisher. I seem to recall he does not have the master engine off. Somewhere on the left-hand side is a mirror head, a sight mirror head control lever, which locks the sight mirror in position. To see out, he has a single small periscope on the left-hand side of his hatch, and a unity sight. The unity sight is your backup sight. There's no auxiliary sight in the same manner as another tank. And remember, even the commander cannot control the gun. He does not have a gunner's control handle. He can control traverse with the salute to Q, but he cannot control elevation, and he has no trigger except for the coax. So if the gunner is going to engage with anything and the primary day sight is gone and the night sight can't be used in the day, the only choice he has is to basically hip shoot
Fire.
with the unity sight. That's it. And as for firing main gun, well, I mean, I guess you can try firing main gun. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. Not advised, but that's what he has. Okay, so before talking about the laser, let's see, what else can we talk about here? Okay, so we got some filters here. A reticle illuminator. So in low light, not blackness, this is not a night sight, it's not night capable, but in low light, or if you're shooting at a very dark background, you can turn on reticle illumination. This is your ballistic computer adjustment control. In American terms, if you're inputting a discrete CCF, a computer correction factor, this is the equivalent. So those charts or graphs I saw on the other side, they will give you data points for settings for barrel wear, temperature, air pressure, whatever. So looking at the chart on the right hand side of the gun, you would say something, okay, this gun has 200 rounds EFC equivalent, so that's how much wear it has. The current pressure is however many hectopascals, or whatever the Russians use for air pressure. the temperature is 14 degrees Celsius, and by doing a little bit of mathematics and looking at the charts, you'll tell the gunner, okay, your correction factor is going to be -8, so you rotate this dial to -8, and that'll do the same thing. Remember, there is no atmospheric sensor on this tank, to the point that there's no crosswind sensor, so crosswinds will be an issue, or can be an issue, but that is what that does. To talk about the laser rangefinder, I think we first have to talk about how the engagements themselves happen. So actually, let's go back to Sabo. And let's have a look at the reticle. So the reticle is a couple of components. You have a range scale up here, so it's currently set to just under 800 meters. Your aim point is the top of this large caret here. These other ones are used for estimating lead. They're also, if I recall, at a 4mm. That doesn't sound right because this is a fixed by 8. I'd have to check what the mil ratings are for these gaps. But it's a fixed by 8 sight, so there's no scanning really in this. You're fairly dependent on the TC or the Unity side. Stadiometric rangefinder on the bottom right. He has one of his own, and importantly, a little red circle. What this little red circle does is it is the aim point of the laser rangefinder. Now remember, the laser rangefinder is not part of the main sight module. It aims through the same optic, but it's not the same sight, which means that where it is aiming and where your sight is aiming are not necessarily the same thing. So this has to be calibrated in place. Actually, it's projected by the laser rangefinder, now think about it, because it will go out after you laser to a target. The circle will disappear until it's ready to laser again. So you find your target, you laser to the target, and you'll see two things happen. Firstly, the range wheel at the top will whirl away to the appropriate range, and secondly, your aim point is going to adjust for the correct super elevation. So lasing, 3, 2, 1 now. So there you go. We have a laze of 1178 meters, let's say. And you saw the caret go up. So go out, okay, 1177. I don't know what they do, close enough. Now, the other thing to note is that obviously elevation is going to vary depending on what ballistic solution you have input. So if I select heat, you saw it just dropped way down. Sabo, heat. Alright, so we'll go back to Sabo, and then we'll talk about two other features. First, the autoloader. So the gun is not ready to fire. There is no ready to fire light. Oh, actually, I will say that it can be, you can manually adjust the range as well by use of a range wheel. The range wheel is located down here, and by keeping your eye to the sight and twiddling this thing, you can adjust the range as you saw. The control to load the autoloader is this button here. So it's located just directly behind the handle. You just flick up with your thumb when it's time to load around. And the standard Soviet practice is you do not load around until given the fire command and you know which round to load. So that's a gunner Sabo tank. We have Sabo selected, push the button. The gun elevates to the loading position. But as the gun is elevated, you will see that the sight remains on target. So this is a modern stabilization system. The sight is stabilized. The gun tries to follow it. And we now have a big, huge red gun is ready to fire light. So we have lased. After you laze, okay, now we're 1200 meters from this target. Place the crosshair center mass. Whoops. And away you go, on the way. The gun does not automatically load until you push the auto load button. Now, let us say, for the sake of example, there's a bunch of bushes and whatever in the way. So this is where you would use the first and last return features on an M1, or on the M60A3 if you recall, first return, second return, and last return. You get a choice of 3. The Russian equivalent to this is a gate. The gates can be set to 1200 and 1800 meters. This is a 1200 meter setting up here, 1800 down here. So what this will do is it will ignore or give an invalid return for anything less than 1200 meters. It's not going to give you the longer return. It'll just say, hey, I got a bad return, and you got to figure out what to do from there. So what this means is that I can laze a distance target. I can laze the 1200 meter target, but if I laze at something under 1200 meters, I get a bad return, and a bad return defaults to the 800 meter battle site. So at least you know if you think that the distance is more than 1200 meters, and if you get a battle site return, you know that your laser rangefinder did not correctly range to the target, there is something else. And the 1800 meter gate performs in exactly the same way, except for 1800 meters. So there's your 2290 meter target, and there's your bad return for something less than 1800 meters. Now your next problem is leading targets. Should be a couple of moving targets here somewhere. Okay, a couple of chieftains. There is no lead computer in this. You track, you laze, but then nothing happens. Did I turn off the gate? I did not turn off the gate. So what you do is you have to estimate time of flight and lay it off accordingly. So let's say I'll go for the first long line here. Okay, that was correct. Now when you're flinging saber rounds with a time of flight of less than a second, that's not so much of a problem. But if you're now loading heat rounds with a significant time of flight, things start getting a little bit more difficult. So let's try aiming for the first carrot. Close. So just a tad beyond first carrot. I keep forgetting to reload it. Doesn't. You get used to it with time. Okay, so let's try there. Did I get him? Very close. But you can imagine that at longer ranges and faster targets, lead is a problem. And actually, I'm not sure it does counter correction either. So you do have your basic ballistic computer for elevation, but that's basically all it does. Alright, so you heard that the carousel took a lot longer to spin around and load that way. So the carousel spins only one direction. If the next round that you want happens to be in the next slot in the carousel, it'll take about 6 seconds to load. I shouldn't have missed. If the round that you want is the previous slot in the carousel has to spin the entire way around. Oh, close. And it'll take about 15 seconds to load your next round. So there's actually two philosophies on how you load the carousel on a T72. One is that you load them in blocks, all the saber together, all the heat together, all the frag together. That means that as you are firing sequential rounds, the same type of round, your reload is always going to be fairly consistent, 6 seconds. However, if you have to change rounds, you could be waiting quite a while for the next round type to come into the carousel as it spins around. The alternative is that you can go saber heat frag, saber heat frag, saber heat frag. That gives you a very consistent loading time no matter what the round type is, but that consistent time is a little bit longer, let's say 8 or 9 seconds. So there you go. All right. Next fire control feature to talk about is delta D. That's this little toggle switch here. Oh, incidentally, there's a toggle switch here for the stabilization. The stabilization motor will burn out after about an hour, so just turn it on when you really need it. And your hydraulic control switch is here. Delta D is aiming at a fixed point in 3D space. So as I laze to a target, let's put a heat round back, saber round back in. As I laze to a target, what I've done is I have told the ballistic computer that a target is at a fixed 3D point in space relative to the tank. So it knows the distance, it knows the angle of elevation, and it knows the direction, at least relative to the hull. Which means that as you drive around, the ballistic computer will remember where it is in relation to this fixed 3D point in space. It knows the direction by the difference in movement between the turret and hull, and it knows distance by how far the tracks have gone. Now, granted, the tracks could slide around a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, the difference is pretty minimal. So watch what happens as I drive at full speed towards the Centurion. You're going to see the range clock start going down. And as I turn more parallel or angular to it, you'll see that the range clock slows down much slower because the distance to that fixed point doesn't get as slow as close as quickly. So after having done that, you should still get a hit. Now, why would you need to use this? Oh, I should say that some Western fire control systems have it as well, like on Leopard. I believe they call it Rucksteuerung. But we'll get to that in the Leopard FCS videos. Well, remember, you can't just laze and boom in this because your laze point and your point of aim are two entirely different places. You have to laze and then lay instead of lay and then laze. And it can be quite a significant amount of time between when you do the one and do the other. So let's say I'm aiming at a long distance target here. When you laze at it, the reticle is going to drop a fairly substantial amount. I then have to put the reticle back onto the target, and all the time the tank is doing 20-30 kilometers an hour. So if it takes me 5 or 6 seconds, I could be 100 or 200 yards closer, which, especially at long ranges with the ballistic arc, is not insignificant. So as I start trundling towards the target, watch what happens to the range counter. Laze, relay, and miss. But at least the range was correct. Let's try that again. Let's try reloading. Laze, lay on target. All the time the range scale is continuing to go down. That was a target. Just clipped the top left turret there. So you saw the range scale continue to drop, and what would have happened was the reticle was also continuing to elevate actually, in order to get a hit on target. Now if I had a heat round, that would have been a lot more noticeable, but that's how it works. Now the last thing to talk about is the coaxial machine gun. The problem with the coaxial machine gun is it's not connected to the ballistic computer. The ballistic computer can input these settings. If for some reason you want to input a different setting, there is a manual override up here that you can have sabot, heat, or frag. This is the override, but there's no setting for the coaxial machine gun. So what you have to do, actually let me, where are these two? Let me get a bit of distance here to these troopies. is you have to lace the target, reset the range to 0, and then use these graduations here. So this is for the coaxial machine gun. And because the coax is way over on the right hand side, you can see the parallax effect between 50 meters and 100 meters. How far off you have to aim. So lace to the target. That's less than, that looks like it's less than 400 meters. So that's where we are here. 700 meters. You remember mentally that your target is 700 meters away. You then press that left thumb button, reset range to 0, which, as you can see, will lift the reticle a little bit. So let me empty the round here.
Ceasefire.
So I should be loading, oh, maybe I loaded the wrong kind here. Okay, so I have a frag round here. Okay, so I have an 800 meter target, and if I fire the machine gun, it will miss completely.
Ceasefire.
Because it's not connected to the ballistic sight. So I remember that it's at 800 meters. Default range is 0. You saw the reticles come up. I then aim the 700 meter reticle on the target, and this should bounce off the Centurion now.
Ceasefire.
There you go. Now, if you have a target at under 400 meters, you're going to get a bad lace. I think it was 400 meters. If that happens, let's see what's the range here. Yep, 400 meters. If that happens, well, you're close enough that you can probably just adjust off anyway. So reset range to 0, place your 400 meter reticle on target.
Ceasefire.
I think he's already dead, actually. And just adjust off. So that's the coaxial. Hydraulic switch, couple of status lights, so they include stabilization on, head mirror on for the sight, hydraulics on, stab on, TC's override is on or in use, gun is loaded. There might be one, there's another one, I can't remember what it is offhand. Right, so that is it for the daylight FCS. So our next thing to do is have a look and see what happens at nighttime. I can't think of anything else that's here now. All right, nighttime. Night gunnery in T72 is basically one step up from non-existent, and it's probably closer to the Inshallah school of gunnery than anything else. The TC has, again, his sight will select, oh, stop it, driver, gunner. The TC will select night mode on his TKN3, which is a fixed 4x passive sensor. Let me turn on counter rotation here. It's a fixed 4x, exactly the same reticle graduations, and is used solely for target acquisition. Hopefully your target is very, very close, because the spotlight is kind of small. To control the spotlight, he has this illuminator control here. So the spotlight you saw in the front, toggle all the way to the left is always on, center is off, and on the right is target designate. So when he presses the target designate button, not only will it traverse the gun over, it'll illuminate with his commander spotlight a little bit. At least I'm pretty sure it will traverse at the same time. I don't think this disables it. Perhaps somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And that's it. That is everything the commander can do at night. The gunner is similarly inconvenienced. There is a really big toggle here for the spotlight on the outside. And actually it's a sort of a weird design feature. The spotlight was moved from the left to the right on T72, apparently because it's in the same place as the coaxial machine gun. By placing the spotlight on the right hand side, the gunner cannot stick his head up in front of the coaxial machine gun and get his head blown off. Now frankly, the question is raised, just how many drivers did they lose and how did they manage to lose them for that to become a design criterion. But I guess it doesn't hurt. The gunner's night sight is a module completely independent for everything on the right here. It's permanently fixed in place. There's a protective screen on the outside to protect the sensitive night electronics during daylight. The advantage of this is that compared to, let's say, Chieftain, you don't have to pull the day sight out and replace it with a night sight. I mean, it's permanently fixed in place and permanently bore sighted to the gun. However, because it is completely independent to what is happening on that side of things, there's no laser rangefinder. You are down purely to battle sight gunnery, because remember, the laser rangefinder is just simply fixed to the housing and bears no relation to where the gun is or where the sight is, which means that you cannot laser rangefind at night. Fortunately, as I say, the night sight is very simple. That's it. And because the effective range of the night sight and spotlight is somewhere just over 1 kilometer anyway, it doesn't really matter. So what they have done, very helpfully, is they have put a little chart up here that you can use to know where to aim depending how far away you think your target is. So with Sabo up to 1100 meters, you simply aim at the top of this line. With Heat, up to 200 meters, Frag 100 meters, and 200 meters in the Coaxial. If you're firing somehow, you can see a target at night. At 1900 meters, you aim at the bottom of the line. For Heat, 400 meters, bottom of the line, 300 for Frag. You get the idea. You never use the top of the carrot for Sabo. For Heat, well, this is probably going to be your battle sight. Battle sight range for this is the top of the carrot, and I'd argue the same for the coax, but basically for coax you just adjust off anyway. And if you're optimistic enough to shoot at night with Heat at 1000 meters, aim using that. So as I say, it is basically battle sight gunnery. So I have Sabo loaded, and they want your T72. Now remember, in this case, the sight is slaved to the gun. This isn't a stabilized sight like the daylight sight is. So when you hit the reload button, it elevates off target. Before resetting back to where you were before. And that's it. That is night gunnery in the T72. No super elevation, no lead, obviously not like daylight, no laser rangefinders. Good luck. And with that, that brings us to the end of the switchology of the interior of T72. Woohoo! Right, hopefully you got an idea as to how T72 works. Again, if you are or were a crewman of one of these vehicles, I think the next one I really want to have a look at is the Austrian Ulan. But I've got a couple of requests for Leopard 2, and 1 or 2 people have volunteered for that as well. So it very well may be Leopard 2 comes next. We'll see. But reach out to me on preferably Facebook Messenger is usually the best way of reaching me, because half the time YouTube doesn't give me messages. It happens. And we'll see where we go from here. So otherwise, hope you found it interesting and informative. And I'll talk to you on the next one. Take care.